On July 19th, 1977, the world teacher, the Christ Maitreya, head of the spiritual hierarchy, emerged from his ancient retreat and is now in the modern world. With his disciples, the masters of the wisdom, he will inaugurate the new age of synthesis and brotherhood.
Good morning and welcome to our World Teacher Program on Wellington's Access Radio 106.1 FM. Presented by Teresa and David on behalf of Share International New Zealand.
The title of today's show is Homeopathy's Forgotten History in US Healthcare. This interview with Jerry Kantor by Jason Francis was sourced from the December 2024 edition of Share International magazine. Jerry Kantor is an acupuncturist and homeopath specializing in pediatrics, mental illness, autism spectrum ailments, autoimmune conditions, and infertility, and is based near Boston, Massachusetts, USA.
He has authored several books, including Sane Asylums, The Success of Homeopathy Before Psychiatry Lost Its Mind, 2022, and The Emotional Roots of Chronic Illness, Homeopathy for Existential Stress, 2023. Kantor was interviewed for Share International by Jason Francis, who began by asking, "Could you tell us how homeopathic medicine came into existence and how it treats patients?"
Jerry Kantor answers, the ancient Greek philosopher Hippocrates, 460 to 377 BC, also known as the father of medicine, first expressed the law of similars, saying, "By similar things a disease is produced, and through the application of the like is cured." Samuel Hahnemann, the German physician, developed this idea further in the late 1700s. In his teaching, substances that can produce a set of symptoms in a gross amount can be diluted so that when the resulting medicine is administered, a similar condition is produced, but one that the vital force in the human body is able to effectively repel.
Vaccines, which homeopaths basically invented, are a very crude cousin of homeopathy. The difference is everybody gets the same vaccine, so there is no customization of the medicine to your individual situation. And you are also getting a gross amount of it, which is very un-homeopathic. Vaccines evolved with the beginning of homeopathy. It's terrible that homeopathy is disrespected, having a common origin with vaccines.
Jason Francis then asks, could you talk about how homeopathic medicines are developed? Something called proving?
Homeopathic research is conducted in what is known as a proving. These trials involved administering safe quantities of the substance to healthy human volunteers, provers, to generate symptoms.
The term proving is derived from the German word Prüfung, meaning test or examine. Symptoms generated during a proving are documented in a homeopathic materia medica, a record of substances and the symptoms they produce, to aid homeopaths in finding and prescribing that substance in the future. If a substance can produce a set of symptoms in healthy provers who are not told what substance they are researching, it will have a curative effect when prescribed to those who are unwell with similar symptoms.
Another way to think about this is that the proving produces the inverse of the law of similars. As opposed to curing a state of ill health in a person with an ailment, the proving activates that state in healthy individuals. Once understood, and the substance is diluted and energized via succussion, shaking hard, it can then be used to treat the symptom profile activated in the healthy cohort of research volunteers.
How did you get interested in homeopathy?
I was an acupuncturist for many years and always had some connection to homeopathy. There came a point where I was good acupuncturist, but I wanted to amplify my practice and also be able to work long distance.
I thought that I would study herbs, but something about Chinese herbs did not appeal to me. I explored on homeopathic software. What I quickly realized was the remedies each possess a very interesting existential quandary or issue that's much more specific than anything that you would find in Chinese medicine. That completely fascinated me. The way in which the remedies can address mental or emotional problems, which are way beyond the reach of acupuncture, just absolutely floored me. And of course it allowed me to work long distance. My acupuncture needles aren't long enough to reach anybody in different towns or states or countries. I fell in love with it just through studying Materia Medica books.
My most recent book, called The Emotional Roots of Chronic Illness, Homeopathy for the Existential Stress, is a deep dive into the existential issues that are embedded within the remedies. Every time I treat someone, I learn something new about the person, but also about the remedy itself. What's also fascinating when you are a homeopath is that every substance is animated by consciousness. That's not a fanciful expression.
When you do the homeopathic research, you produce a conscious state in willing participants in the research that becomes evident. So we can say basically what a quartz crystal is thinking, or what the consciousness of iron or potassium is, because we know what states of mind those substances bring out, completely objectively, in homeopathic research participants. It's animism. To a homeopath, everything is alive, and that's fantastic.
It's so different than working in conventional medicine, when consciousness is very much overlooked in a client. I think physicians would be happier if their clients were basically animated corpses, because they wouldn't have to deal with the consciousness aspect of the person. Just work with the diagnostic box the client is assigned. In homeopathy, the individuality of the person matters much more than the common categories of diagnoses.
In your opinion, when was the golden era of homeopathy in the US, and could you describe the impact homeopathy had during this time?
That's the topic of my book, Sane Asylum, The Success of Homeopathy Before Psychiatry Lost Its Mind. Its heyday was the mid-1800s through the early 1900s. That time encompassed the Civil War. Homeopathy was incredibly popular. I had to write this book because it would not have been written by a conventional historian. The pharmaceutical industry's interests are antithetical to it. There are some very inconvenient truths attached to it. So this history has been suppressed vehemently in the conventional medicine world.
There were hundreds of homeopathic hospitals during that time, and 25% of the mental hospitals were homeopathic. Probably more if you count the ones that weren't officially homeopathic but employed homeopaths. They were very popular, and much more so than the other asylums, which were cruel and punished and tortured clients. Homeopathic asylums were utopias. They had self-sustaining farms, offered their clients many activities, and had phenomenally sensitive nursing.
In my book, I have a chapter on how Mary Todd Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln's widow, was, I believe, cured through homeopathy, in a history that was never told, in what I called a sane asylum. Lincoln's cabinet was full of homeopaths. Lincoln himself, as a lawyer, who created the legal charter for a homeopathic school in Illinois. From the 1850s into the early 1900s, homeopathy really flourished in this country.
The history of its demise and marginalisation points directly to the Flexner Report of 1910, Medical Education in the United States and Canada by Abraham Flexner. That was a disastrous year, not just for homeopathy, but for holistic medicines in general. The report was an attempt funded by John D. Rockefeller, 1839 to 1937, to clear the field for his oil industry byproduct drugs, which were patented and more profitable. He didn't want any competition from these non-patented homeopathic drugs.
Jason Francis then asks, how many homeopathic pharmacies and medical schools existed in the US?
There were more than 1,000 homeopathic pharmacies, and in those days a pharmacist could practice medicine that was restricted later on. There were at least 22 homeopathic medical schools. The history gets messy because there were mergers and separations, but a large percentage of the populace utilized homeopathy very happily. I would say at least 25% of the American population.
Many homes had a homeopathic materia medica or repertory, an index listing symptoms in the homeopathic materia medica, as well as medicines to give and in what gradation. To the best of my knowledge, homeopathy was very popular during that time.
Aside from the Flexner report, what other reasons were involved in the decline of homeopathy?
Quite a few things. There were some homeopaths who betrayed the cause. There was a lot of money available for people who would sign on for biomedical scientific research. Homeopathy doesn't require any financial resources. It's not really good for the economy. There were tremendous pressures on physicians to abandon homeopathy. It really suffered.
The big asylums, which were funded by the states, were designed to handle 500 clients and grew to having 2,000 clients. Physicians couldn't treat those people effectively, and they couldn't fund helpful staff, so the care declined precipitously, and homeopathy got associated with it, as unjust as it sounds.
Basically, it was the promotion of patented medicines, and Rockefeller put his name on boards of medical schools that he funded. So, when homeopathy ceased to be practiced in medical schools, there was a trickle-down effect and people began to follow suit.
But anything really powerful you cannot kill, so it has always remained because the principle of like can cure like is part of nature. Homeopathy nowadays is flourishing under the radar, in some ways because nothing else can treat conditions such as autism, quite frankly, and this huge host of autoimmune conditions we're confronting. Homeopathy has always been excellent in mass epidemics.
It's such a threat to the conventional world that it's constantly being fought. The pharmaceutical industry has so much money and so many ways in which it can create propaganda against homeopathy. It is difficult to circumvent. In any case, the history is interesting, and I try to go through it as well as I can in my latest book's chapter, Concession to the Spirit of the Times.
You're listening to the World Teacher Programme on Wellington's Access Radio 106.1 FM.
Jason Francis asks, how did homeopathic doctors treat their patients in the asylums of the day?
Jerry Kantor replies, privacy concerns extended back then. I found old records, but people's names were never given. What happened in the hospital, at least, was that the doctors would see patients and prescribe various homeopathic remedies for conditions.
Mental conditions at that time were not named as they are today. They had names like dementia praecox, now known as schizophrenia. There also came a period of time, unfortunately, eugenics, a widely condemned racist approach to increasing certain genetic characteristics in a population, filtered into diagnoses, which was widespread in all forms of medicine. Some patients also suffered from inebriation. There were a lot of alcoholics. There was also a lot of senility. Quite a few remedies were used in those settings. They were actually asylums.
The idea was not to drug someone up, kick them out and send them back to the community. An asylum was a place where you could rest, get good nutrition, get away from your toxic family, and where you could slowly recover from the stress of war. It was not one particular approach. I could give you pages of the remedies that were used per symptom, but it wouldn't explain very much to you. They can be found in my book, Sane Asylums.
Could you tell us how homeopathic psychiatry came about? Was its development concurrent with overall homeopathic medicine?
It's all tied together. In the conventional world, we create silos. Everything is separated. Samuel Hahnemann, founder of modern homeopathy, did not consider psychiatry to be a separate discipline. It was just commonly called homeopathy altogether. Even in acupuncture, which is a totally holistic medicine, there isn't a separate category for mental illness. When psychiatrists went to China and tried to convince the Chinese, the response was, "What are you talking about? We can treat these conditions, we just don't have a separate category for it."
When you do a holistic intake in acupuncture, you look at the tongue, you feel the pulse, and you ask all kinds of questions. You come up with a diagnosis in terms of qi, the body's vital energy or life force, deficiency or qi excess, blood deficiency or phlegm, which incorporates mental or emotional symptoms. You don't pull them out separately.
In my book, Sane Asylums, I created a compendium of madness perspectives, which is sort of a counterpoint to the DSM-5, latest edition of the American Psychiatric Association's reference book on mental health and brain-related conditions. I attempted to list in encyclopedia fashion the many different ways madness has been looked at. Many are contradictory. Many of them reflect religious bias and fear of the mad and the crazy diagnoses that were used.
That's reflected in the homeopathic history of treating so-called psychiatric complaints. That's why the nurses in these asylums were not content to say, "You had such and such a condition, drug you up and that's the end of it." They also engaged at that time in what was called moral hygiene. They engaged with the client and tried to reason with them about their entrenched beliefs while they were recovering from their stresses.
Madness is really the perfect storm of a shock, exhaustion, a belief formed into a strong opinion that gets narrowed, thick-headed and fixated. That's a common-sense way of describing madness. If you do that, you don't have to come up with and pay a lot of lip service to conditions such as schizophrenia. You can actually lead someone to sanity. They're overcoming their fixed beliefs, and you're improving their energy so that they have recourse to behave in a way they've long lost. It's a tremendous advantage and much more humane and effective in the long run than saying, "You've got this disease and you're stuck in it forever."
There are all kinds of models for this in the moral care movement, which drew its inspiration from a town in Belgium called Geel. The mad were kept in foster care. No one tried to treat them. They were tolerated and treated with affection, and everybody signed on for this in Geel. And the asylums followed that dictum themselves.
Next question. Could you tell us more about the moral care movement and how it influenced the care offered in homeopathic hospitals?
It was never something separate. The idea of treating the mad with respect, not categorize them, and not torturing them would be inherent in homeopathy anyway. There were mental hospitals that were not homeopathic, but also practiced moral care throughout that time. It grew out of awareness of Bedlam, a famous psychiatric hospital in England, that it was wrong to view the mad as animal or tortured souls or hopeless. In England, on Sunday afternoons, people used to go to these asylums and watch the crazy or the mad, as though it were an excursion to the zoo. All kinds of horrible things were done to them that the moral care movement really fought against.
It grew out of awareness that this was wrong, and it became understood, through the Quakers actually, that the mad what we call the mentally impaired, need to be treated with respect. They are human beings, and any one of us could fall into it. As I said before, I think it is a perfect storm of exhaustion, shock, and the narrowing of a particular belief that produces much of what we call mental illness. All three of those components can be undone with care, respect, creating opportunities for growth, and homeopathy, which makes an enormous difference and is deeply liberating at the subconscious level. So all of those things put together work very nicely.
Unfortunately, the moral care movement kind of reversed direction again in the 1920s and 30s, along with the onset of the eugenics movement and with the fact that the hospitals were overstretched with patients. The level of care diminished and there was an attack on homeopathy. Now we have all of this psychopharmaceutical treatment of the mentally ill, which is very bad development. I wrote about that in my book in chapter Concessions to the Spirit of the Times.
In your book, Sane Asylums, you talk about Dr. Iris Bell, a psychiatrist with a PhD in neuro and biobehavioural sciences. She has also been a leading researcher in complementary and alternative medicine for about the past 30 years. Could you talk about her work and how it might help to bring homeopathy back into mainstream healthcare and accepted science?
Dr. Bell did a great thing. She participated in a tremendously important legal suit. In 2015, plaintiffs seeking $250 million in damages sued Highlands Incorporated and the Standard Homeopathic Company for falsely and misleadingly representing the active ingredients in homeopathic products. Highlands Incorporated is a division of Standard Homeopathic Company.
After brief deliberation in federal court, the defendants were exonerated and found not in breach of any express warranty or violation of the California Consumer Legal Remedies Act. That's an example of people trying to shut down homeopathy in a court of law. It was fought off in a fantastic case. That was a tremendously important development, and Iris Bell was a key expert testifying in that case.
We need many more cases like that, but frankly, it's hard to fund them. The pharmaceutical industry has endless resources, and they can constantly come at you. In England, there are 3 major publishing houses that used to publish homeopathic textbooks all of the time: Elsevier, Thiem and Springer. They are highly respected. They finally got the message not to promote homeopathy. After decades and decades of publishing homeopathic textbooks, they won't do it anymore. It's awful and quite a shame.
Iris Bell wrote a paper, Adaptive Network Nanomedicine, an integrated model for homeopathic medicine. It refers to minuscule entities known as nanoparticles and nanobubbles, shown to have an effect on biological cells in low doses, creating hormetic effects. Hormesis, a term used by toxicologists to describe an organism's adaptation to stimuli, describes a biphasmic, two-phased response to an external agent in varying dosages.
Basically, she went through the science of it. Homeopathy is highly scientific, and the science of nanomedicine. It has been decided that the conventional view is okay to talk about, but we don't want to talk about homeopathy. In a court of law, when Iris Bell was able to speak, she made the point that this is science, and don't try to pretend it's something else.
Could you talk about what you mean when you say we should invest in sanity?
That's the last chapter in my book. It's a fantasy, I suppose, but let's bring back the asylums, and this idea that people are not the sum of their diagnostic categories. Let's treat them with respect and not take them out until they are fully recovered. It's a very difficult thing to do because people have to live in the asylums, and you have to have wonderful nurses.
But the values of the mid-1800s to the early 1900s, when homeopathy flourished, were good then. People took the time to help each other, to really look thoroughly at these problems and took the time to nurse one another back to health. A lot of it is common sense. We are tormenting the mentally impaired with drugs and creating new conditions that never existed before. Just not doing that and going back to the values of moral care and infusing that with homeopathy is really good mental health care.
In the asylums, people could do carpentry, gardening, were encouraged to read and write poetry, given tasks, encouraged to follow their bliss, and to undo the harm that was done to them, however long it took. And the homeopathic remedies were tremendously helpful in that. But they weren't the only thing. It was all the interventions that were compassionate and infused with common sense. That's what I mean by investing in sanity. Unfortunately, a lot of that means undoing much of the nonsense we have going on now.
Final question. What do you see as the future of homeopathy in American healthcare?
I'd like to be optimistic about it. I think conventional care is committing suicide, basically, in spite of the efforts of the pharmaceutical industry to prove otherwise. Homeopathy is flourishing under the radar. The pharmacies report very robust sales. At some point, something will turn.
We need more homeopathic schools. We need to change what's being taught at the academic level. At the same time, it's always going to attract opposition from moneyed interests. It simply doesn't make the money that conventional biomedical research does. It's driven by the profit principle and not by what's good for us. As long as people realise they want to feel good, and that has nothing to do with how well the economy is doing, they will always be attracted to homeopathy and want it on some level or another. I think the future is bright, and it's probably tied to the idiocies and abuses of the conventional healthcare system.
And that's our program for today. Thank you for listening to us on Wellington's Access Radio 106.1 FM. And please tune in to our next World Teacher program on Saturday the 5th of July at the usual time of 10 a.m.
You can listen again to this program and previous ones by visiting share-international-nz.info and click on the radio tab.